Hello, you're working on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and so I thought this might be a good time to take a look at a little bit of background on the author and her times. So what you have here is an image of Mary Shelley painted during her lifetime, and you get a little feel for the artistic style of the day, a little bit of understanding of who she is and how she dresses, and perhaps this nice couch with a rug of some sort draped over it gives you an idea of sort of the living standards that they may have had. So she is from a rather elite family. Both her parents were political philosophers. This is William Godwin was her father, and Mary Wollstonecraft was her mother. And so you may have seen Shelley, Mary Shelley, our Mary Shelley, noted as Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. So her middle name, if you will, is her mother's maiden name. Her mother, in particular, was a well-known writer and philosopher who advocated for women and women's rights very early on, right? So a very interesting and provocative family. She grew up in England, and this is a nice map of England, as you can see, but she also spent a lot of time up in Scotland. And so this region up here is noted on your map because Dundee is one of the places she spent a lot of time in. And so when looking at Mary Shelley and her history and her background and how that might come through in her works, you'll see that some of the scenes, particularly the scenes when Victor leaves the hustle and bustle of Ingolstadt, when he leaves the hustle and bustle of the university, right? He goes home to the beautiful countryside, and a lot of people think that that was Mary Shelley's experience in Scotland. So to think a little bit about the historical setting, her times, her dates are from 1797 to 1851. Again, this is right as the scientific revolution is becoming more and more understood in general culture, in general society. It's when the Industrial Revolution is full-blown. So she is born 1797. I think we kind of give a date of approximately 1750 for the start of the Industrial Revolution. So in her lifetime, the generation right before she's born, and then in her lifetime as sort of a second-generation Industrial Revolution person, she's seeing extraordinary changes in the cities. She's seeing extraordinary changes in her home country with new technology, and again, thinking of technology as applied science. So she's seeing the scientific revolution, the Industrial Revolution, and she's living in the heart of it here in England. She's seeing all of this happen around her. These are some images from Dundee. This is the Tay River in Scotland. I don't know if you can make out in this image, but right here behind these trees, a lovely little church right there along the river. So you can also see a very modern bridge back here. But a very beautiful rolling plains, rolling hills, and on this, an unusually clear blue sky day in Scotland. So a lovely image. Some other images along the Tay River. Again, her family spent a lot of time in this region. Some of the scenes in Frankenstein, again, reference bucolic, park-like settings along rivers and how peaceful that is. And so these are just some lovely images that seem to have inspired Shelley in that regard. And then this, just an image along the Tay River, a really impressive set of buildings that date from approximately the time of Shelley. Some of them are certainly newer, but the church and that church steeple there, very much apart. She would have seen that. And again, this is a really beautiful picture of that same area. We will often hear people describe Shelley's writing as romantic, that she's part of the Romantic movement. And the Romantic movement in English literature, many of you will know, is from this time period. And it's not just about romance, per se, but it's about this idea of looking back to an earlier, simpler time when life was easier, more countryside, more pastoral, right? And now we're confronted with this urban living that is fast, and there's factories and many people coming into the cities, lots of overcrowding, lots of concerns about water supply and water purity, right? And so if you think about the kind of hard life people have in cities and the hard life in the countryside, and it was never easy, seems nicer, seems easier than what's going on in the cities these days. This is an image of her husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley. He was a poet, as you know. And again, if you've studied any English literature from this time period, you know that he was quite prolific and has a long legacy himself. And Mary Wollstonecraft has a relationship with Shelley that is quite long. She marries him. She has at least one child by him. Sorry, I'm not sure how many children she has. And they are just a very famous couple in literary circles, in elite circles, really, in England and throughout Europe. You probably know, if you've read Mary Shelley's preface, if you've read an introduction to her work, that it was in Geneva, Switzerland, where Shelley, both Percy Shelley and Mary Shelley, were staying. They were on vacation, on holiday, and they were there with friends, and they had a villa, a nice house near a lake in Switzerland, and they were trying to entertain themselves because a terrible storm had come up. So it truly was a dark and stormy night in their home where they were living. And again, this is before electric lights. Electricity's a thing. This is the time of Ben Franklin and his kite and his key, right? So electricity is something that we're working on and we're thinking about, but most of these houses would have been lit by fireplaces and candlelight. So it would have been a very spooky sort of night if it was dark and stormy and lightning. And they decide they've got to stay in, and they're going to entertain themselves by telling each other ghost stories. And this, we think, is where Shelley's premise for Victor Frankenstein and his laboratory and his challenges to traditional ideas about science and biology and life and maybe ethics comes along. This is a nice modern image of Geneva, Switzerland. Again, if you get a chance, go. Beautiful place for skiing, of course. Still a wonderful place where people vacation, just as the Shelleys did. This image is a map, as you can see, and it's a map, really, of the Arctic Circle, or a portion of it. And the reason this is here is because when Shelley's work opens, you have letters going from Robert Walton. He's a fictional character, right? But Robert Walton, and his goal is to try to explore magnetic north, try to explore the Arctic Ocean, to find a passageway from England to Asia. It doesn't require that you have to go around the southern Cape of Africa or the southern Cape of South America, right? That he wants to find a shorter, faster passage. So we understand, here's England over here. Kind of might be hard to see on this map. Here's England. We understand he travels to St. Petersburg, where he's putting together an expedition. He's putting together ships, he's putting together a crew, and what he hopes to do is explore this region here, going into what would be north of Siberia. Again, here's China. This is where he wants to get, is over here to China and India and Japan, and try to do so in a faster way. So this was a going concern at the time. We're still exploring that area today. As you know, the polar ice caps are thinning. There's more ability, and I believe it was this past year for the first time that an icebreaker was actually able to make that Northwest Passage. So it was a thing back in the 19th century. It's a thing in the 21st century to try to navigate and explore this region. So I wanted to give you, in addition, in this video, just a little outline of the first few chapters. So you know, because I'm sure you've read, the book begins with a preface written by Shelley, where Shelley's actually speaking to you. She's talking to her reader about some of her influences and some of her inspiration. it can be hard going. I know the vocabulary and the word choices can be older than we're used to. Absolutely, you're reading an original work in its language. It's English. I know, you may not think so, but it is. You should also know that Shelley's work was quite controversial when she published it. There were questions about religion in her work. There were questions about ethics in her work. Was she condemning science? Was she condemning industrialism? Was she just telling a ghost story? Was she just telling a horror story? Is she just trying to write a good story? So there were lots of questions about her inspiration. This book became very popular very fast. It went into several printings right away. It was the most read book in England and in parts of Europe for a while. It got turned into a play. So this was really a very popular work, and she does feel the need to explain to you some of her inspirations in her preface. So try to take a look at that. This is then followed by the book actually begins, and you might think, oh wait, there's a series of letters. What is this? This is her way of telling the story. So she starts off with a series of letters written by this explorer to his sister. Again, they're fictional letters, but as we said, the premise is not. This is stuff that's going on at the time. The explorer, Robert Walton, is attempting to discover the Northwest Passage and magnetic north. So as you read his letters, you'll get a feeling for Shelley's understanding of the excitement of that exploration, of that scientific endeavor in her day. As you read these letters, you'll find out that Walton's ship gets stuck in the ice. His timing was bad. He spends a lot of time trying to put together his ship and his crew, and he wants to go at a certain time of year when he thinks that he'll be less likely to get stuck in the ice. He still gets stuck. And as they're stuck in the ice, and the impression you have from reading is that they've got plenty of supplies, they're not worried about it, they believe that they'll be able to make it, strangers start to come by, visitors pass by. He'll talk about a large hulking man, a large hulking creature with a dog sled goes by, and just goes by very quickly. And then that man seems to be followed by another. And this fellow, much smaller, much unhealthier, stops. He's half dead. And Walton takes him into his ship, tries to restore his health through food and rest and warmth. And then this visitor, Victor Frankenstein, begins to tell his story. So the story of Frankenstein is actually narrated to Robert Walton, who then tells the story to his sister. It's such an extraordinary story. He writes it down in a series of letters. So just a quick outline of some of these first chapters. We learn that early on in Victor's life, he suffers a great tragedy. His mother dies. And this seems to really affect him greatly, and also affect him in his pursuit of knowledge. Mary Shelley's mother died when Shelley was just a month old. So there are some similarities there to her life and the tragedy in Victor's life. Victor will attend university. He makes that decision, and he will study science. But there are lots of different ways to approach science at his university. There's the old way, or alchemy, and then there's the new way. And this is the new chemistry that is being created because of the scientific revolution. Right? So you might be looking at how Shelley presents that and how she talks about the differences between those two. Here's a quote in her Volume 1, Chapter 2, where Victor himself is trying to decide which teacher he'll work with, right? It's like some of you try to decide which major you'll pursue. The ancient teachers of this science, alchemy, promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters, the chemists, promise very little. They know that metals cannot be transmuted. They know that the elixir of life is a chimera. But these philosophers, whose hands seem only made to dabble in dirt, and their eyes to pore over microscopes or the crucible, have indeed performed miracles. So let's look at this for a second. The modern masters promise very little. They know that metals cannot be transmuted. The old alchemists, the old natural philosophers, if you want to call them that, were always in pursuit of the philosopher's stone, a particular kind of stone that could help them change the properties of metal. In particular, they wanted to change lead to gold. Well, sure, who wouldn't? the modern chemists know that this can't be. They also looked for potions to make people invincible, potions to make people live forever. And this, Shelley says, is a chimera. This is a mythical thing. A chimera is an ancient Greek mythical being. But these philosophers whose hands, they dabble in dirt and they pore over microscopes, and the crucible would be, your Bunsen burner, have indeed performed miracles. The new chemists penetrate into the recesses of nature and show how she works in her hiding places. They're discovering laws, right? It's laws of nature, laws of how they're discovering facts. They ascend into the heavens. They have discovered how the blood circulates. They know the nature of the air we breathe. And that's true. They were working on the human blood circulation, the circulatory system, and they were working on the nature of oxygen and nitrogen and trying to figure out what's going on there, right? They're doing that. They have acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They can command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows. So this is very colorful language, romantic language, describing the possibilities of science. So keep reading. If you've just started and you're finding it slow going, keep going, keep going. Accept that challenge. Move on. While Victor is with Robert Walton, he tells them the whole story. He himself, Victor, has been pursuing science for the science's sake, right? Just as Robert Walton is pursuing that Northwest Passage. I know I can do it. Looking for magnetic north, and here he is stuck in the ice with his men, right? Victor starts to raise a lot of ethical concerns when he's talking to Robert Walton. It's almost as though it's the Jeff Goldblum quote from the original Jurassic Park, right? We never asked whether we should, we only asked whether or not we could. So Victor is actually, Shelley is asking that in many ways for some of the first times, right? Especially in popular literature. Creation scene. Does Shelley give us a creation scene? I don't know that she does. How does she tell us that Victor creates his creature? We assume electricity is involved because electricity is, again, very exciting, all the rage. Shelley will mention galvanism. Galvanism is the word she uses for electricity, right? So take a look at that. So keep reading. Don't be discouraged. If you need something fun, this YouTube link is an early version of Hollywood doing a creation scene, which Shelley doesn't give us. So I'll click out of this video and you can go on to the next selection, and if you like, take a look at this YouTube video. As always, let me know if you have any questions, if you're running into any trouble. Send me a quick email or give me a phone call. Good luck.